Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 17 coverage of the Zurich 1953 Candidates Tournament. In round 17, there were a couple of interesting games involving king walks, or king moves that I wanted to highlight. I'm just going to mention them and then I'll get on to the main game that we're taking a look at for this round. But if you want to check these out, they're pretty interesting. In the game, Stahlberg against Kotov. Kotov with the black pieces played a an old Indian defense rather, and got an interesting attack going, opened up the H-file, but there was an H-pawn on it that White had put there. Anyway, at a certain point in the game, Kotov played the move King G6, which is kind of a really interesting move, left a piece hanging, but the move King G6 did three things. It moved the king away from a potential check if White had taken the piece that was hanging. It opened up the seventh rank. The king was sitting on G7, went to G6, so that the queen could swing over to the H-file, and it also protected his F-pawn, which was sitting up on F5. So a single move that did three things, and after that the attack crashed through on the H-file. So pretty interesting game, although there was like some long slow maneuvering leading up to it, but just that one interesting position. And then in the game, Hervé against Geller. Geller, also with the black pieces, had played for a kingside attack, and they had reached kind of a stalemate, and they moved their pieces around for a little bit, and then Geller finally hit on an idea, and he walked his king from the king's side all the way over to the queen side, and once it was over on the other side of the board, then he was able to open up some lines on the king side, and his attack crashed through. So pretty interesting from that point of view. But both of those games were kind of long and complicated, and had these sections of the game where there was just a lot of maneuvering and not much going on. So the game I chose to look at is this game. With the white pieces, we have Mark Taimanov, the Russian grandmaster. Taimanov is still alive today. He's 88 years old. He's, in addition to being a grandmaster, he's also a concert pianist. And with the black pieces, his opponent is Svetozar Gligoric, who's a Serbian grandmaster. He lived until 2012. He died in 2012 at the age of 89. Played against a great many world champions, including Bobby Fischer. Had some great games against Bobby Fischer. But here he is facing Mark Taimanov. So Taimanov kicks off with e4. Let's get the sound. e4. And Gligoric plays c5, allowing the Sicilian, not afraid to play the Sicilian against Taimanov, d6. And Taimanov chooses bishop b5. This is the Canal-Sokolsky attack. If in this move here, black had played knight to c6, and then bishop b5 was played. That's called the Rossolimo. So these are very closely related variations, the Rossolimo and the Canal-Sokolsky, also called the Moscow variation. This has come back into fashion somewhat, this bishop b5 move. For a while it was somewhat of a sideline, but it's being played more these days, so interesting game to look at. Bishop d7 is the main move here, just blocking the check. You can also play knight to c6, blocking that way, and that transposes into a line of the Rossolimo. But this is the main independent move. There actually is a third move here, which is knight to d7, which is a way to play if you want to keep all the pieces on the board. After bishop d7, then there's these exchanges, bishop takes and queen takes. Notice you take with the queen and not the knight, because the knight is just more active on c6. So take back with the queen and allow the knight to come to c6. Castles. Knight to c6 now. And Taimanov had prepared an opening variation here, starting with rook to e1. The normal way of playing is with c3 and d4, and just going for the big center. But he had a very specific idea in mind. He played rook e1, and Gligoric did the normal developing move, knight f6, and I pushed on with d4. C takes d4, and now instead of taking back, he plays the move bishop to g5, which is a pawn sack. He could have just grabbed the pawn here, and that's okay for white. But this bishop g5 move is a pawn sack. And so in his opening preparation, well, first of all, so Gligoric is seeing this position for the first time over the board, and he manages to find a good move here. So you might want to pause the video right at this point, try and figure out how best to take advantage of this bishop g5 move and the seeming pawn sacrifice. Okay, pause the video, and if you want some time to think about it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about the analysis that Taimanov had done, and then I'll pause again and give you another chance to think about it and see if you can find the move, because what Gligoric played was a move that Taimanov hadn't analyzed. So the first move that Taimanov thought of, this is according to Bronstein, it's his commentary in the book, was the move e5. So just shoring up the pawn. Hey, it makes sense. You've got a pawn. Why not hang on to it? And what Taimanov had figured was that after taking the knight, he could play c3 here. And, he's doubled the pawns on the king's side, and he's going to be able to undermine the center. And actually, this is good for white. The chess engine agrees. So his Taimanov's analysis was correct, that this is a good sacrifice if black plays this way. So e5, a logical try, but that's sort of what Taimanov was expecting. Another move he was considering was the move g6, which would allow this exchange, bishop takes, e takes, and then he thought he would just grab the pawn. So he gets his pawn back. There's this isolated pawn that black has. He thought he should be fine here. And in fact, white is good once again. Okay, so back to the initial position. The third thing he had analyzed was, what if black just tries to move the knight away so as not to suffer the doubling of pawns, and played the move knight to g4. Then he figured, well, he just grabbed this pawn, and then after h6, kicking the bishop. This is the tricky part. He doesn't want to play bishop to h4 because it would just get kicked with g5 and knocked back to the square on g3, which is not particularly promising in this position. If the bishop goes to f4, it suffers from a fork. If it goes to e3, then there's exchange. The knight takes bishop exchange is probably good for black. And if it goes to d2, it blocks the defense of the knight, so that hangs a piece. So the bishop has to go all the way back to c1. But it turns out after this, white is still fine. Kind of a funny move, retreating the bishop back to c1. But if you look at the development, black has this knight here, which is just going to be kicked back. Otherwise, black still needs to castle and develop his bishop. White's already castled, and he's just going to have to redeploy his knight and his bishop, and he will have a fine game as rook is already in the center. So he's not doing badly in development, and actually this position is also fine for white. So all of those things are okay for white. So Gligoric over the board found one move here that keeps an advantage for black. So if you want to pause the video again a second time, see if you can find the move that Gligoric played in this position. Okay, he played the move d5, and this is the only move, as I said, that keeps an advantage for black. And it's the move that Taimanov didn't consider in his analysis. So I think it's kind of interesting also from the point of view of how modern players prepare versus how they prepared back then without computers. Because if you put this position in a computer, the first move it comes up with is d5. So that would be at the top of everybody's analysis tree. And Taimanov, who was analyzing it, either by himself or with the help of assistants, just hadn't thought of that move. But Gligoric found it over the board. So interesting play from the grandmasters. So now black is a little bit better. So white's given up something. Bishop takes f6. He goes ahead and doubles the pawns. And then e takes d5. Getting his pawn back. But this doesn't get the pawn back. I mean, he grabs here and then he grabs... let's see, could he have tried... Yeah, he can't play knight takes d5. I guess knight takes d4 because the knight can take back. Is that right? Knight takes d4 doesn't work because d takes e4. Yeah, and the knight is suffering. Knight takes, queen takes d1, rook takes, b takes c6. So if we pause here, you know, the structure for black looks like a wreck, but he does have an extra pawn, and he's got a bishop against a knight, and he's got open lines for his rooks, and black is actually doing well here. So knight takes d4 is not going to help. So he played e takes d5. The best move, the best try. Queen takes d5, but black stays a pawn up for a while at least. And now knight to c3, a tricky move, hitting the queen, taking advantage of the pin. So that can't be taken. The queen drops back to d7, and now the knight moves to e4. So white gets his pieces out, but he's still just a pawn down. And there's always this move e4 at some point to protect the d-pawn if he's worried about losing it. And well, black castles to the queen side. His king side is a bit messed up. So c3, going after the pawn. And now f5, kicking the knight. So not just defending the pawn and, you know, being passive, but counterattacking. The knight has to go to c5. Well, can go to c5, it does, and hitting the queen. And the queen jumps up to d5, hitting the knight. And now c takes d4, defending the knight. And e5, undermining. So it looks like black is actually going to get his pawn back. So white got the pawn back momentarily, but this e5 regains it. White played rook c1 here. If he were to try, yeah, he can't play d takes e5 because he needs his knight is under attack. He needs the pawn to defend the knight. So he plays rook to c1, defending the knight that way, and then e takes d4. And once again, black is a pawn up. Now, it's not the world's greatest pawn. You know, there are these doubled pawns over here. But, you know, black has open lines for his bishop and his rook and rooks. And his queen is nicely centralized. And his king, it looks a little bit airy over here, but there's no immediate way for white to take advantage of it. Although white tries. So starting with the move knight d3, blockading this d-pawn before it gets dangerous. Also creating a pin on the knight here. Bishop to d6, developing his bishop. And now knight to e5, knight f to e5. If this is exchanged, the other knight can go there. And trying to put pressure on the pinned knight here and create some disharmony in black's position. So aggressive play and good try. Rook h to e8, putting a little more pressure on the knight. And now knight takes c6. So black can't take back with the queen because of the rook, so he takes back with the pawn. Cancel that. He can throw in, that's right, he throws in the move rook takes e1 check, just because he doesn't want to have to worry about the rook exchange the other direction. Cancel that again. White took back with the knight. I guess white wants to keep an eye on the pawn. Let's back up. Was it possible? Yeah, queen takes e1 and knight takes e1 are about the same, but knight takes e1 was what was played. And then he grabs the knight. So there has this, white has succeeded in opening a line towards black's king, so maybe made it a little more unsafe. But he doesn't have a light squared bishop to take advantage of it. All he has is a queen. Now the queen is going to come up to d3, that's the next move. But this transaction also helps support the d-pawn in a way, because now the c-pawn can come forward at some point. And so we've got a pair of pawns that can support each other, whereas that wasn't there before. So pluses and minuses, you know, Taimanov is trying to create some weaknesses, but he also helped out black in a way by bringing these pawns together. And so this d-pawn is no longer isolated. So after queen d3, the king goes to b7. And you see he's guarding this light square here, so the queen can no longer jump on that diagonal and harass the king. b4 was tried, just trying to open up some lines here and maybe be able to attack with the rook if he can open up the b file. Bishop to f4 with a tempo on the rook, hitting the rook here. The rook goes to d1. A little more pressure on the d-pawn. And also, yeah, second point of the move b4. It's controlling the c5 square, so it's not so easy for the c pawn to move forward and support this pawn. The bishop drops back to c7. And now a3 is played. This pawn is still adequately supported, and the bishop from c7 is going to come to b3 and defend it that way. a3 is played, just shoring up this pawn. I'm not sure why he didn't play a4 here to try and act a little more quickly. Yeah, a4 is a move, but actually the chess engine likes the move a3, so maybe there was a danger of this pawn coming under attack. Yeah, I don't know. So a3, good move though, according to the engine. And now bishop to b6, that's what I meant. The bishop is coming there to put pressure on this pawn. And now knight to f3, so piling up. There seems to be a battle raging for the d pawn. But if white can recoup his pawn, he might be in okay shape, but it looks like it's adequately defended. Maybe, again, pushing the a pawn to chase the bishop away is maybe an idea. It's black's turn here. Black tries to move queen to e4. And of course, white doesn't want to trade, because that will bring the pawn forward, and this duo of pawns in the center will be really strong. So white plays a move knight to g5, kicking the queen and encouraging this exchange. Queen takes, rook takes, and just going for the endgame. And this is the second part where I wanted to, the second reason why I wanted to show this game, in addition to that early e5, d5 maneuver. This I think of as a very instructive endgame. So let's watch how it goes from here. Black has an extra pawn, but notice that all his pawns are kind of weak. This one, the d pawn, is sort of artificially isolated because the c pawn is being held back by the pawn on b4. And he has more weak pawns over here. This one is under attack at the moment. And so black does have a bishop versus a knight on a fairly open board. So that can be an advantage in the endgame because it can operate on both sides. And he does have the extra pawn. But black has a really solid structure, right? All his pawns are together here. And it's not clear how white is going to achieve a win out of his somewhat theoretical advantage. What he starts off with is the move a5. So his idea is just to give up this pawn. This pawn is not so important anyway, but if he can create some weaknesses to attack, it'll give him something to play for. So knight takes, and now the rook has to move. The rook comes up to d5, and now the king needs to get into the game. So king takes. King to f1 is played here. It's also the recommended move. I guess if white were to try and hold on to this pawn, is this possible? Probably not a good idea. One thing is it actually allows this pawn to come forward, but yeah, d3 is the top choice of the chess engine. This pawn will become increasingly dangerous. Also, white can still just take here. Okay, so it's better to leave the rook there and bring the king up, as was played in the game. And now black takes on b4, takes back, and king a6, bringing his king into the game. So both sides are getting their kings active, a very important point in the endgame. And black has succeeded in creating a weakness on b4, so he's got something to attack with his king and his pieces. Right here, probably king to e2 should be played. Taimanov tried the move f4 here, so not the best move, but he had a clear idea. He wanted to provide a square for his knight to come back into the game. And so king b5 was played, hitting the pawn, and now knight to e5. And right here it's black's move. Can black take the pawn? Yeah, king takes b4 is playable, but not the best. Let's see, what does... because of knight takes c6 with check, so it doesn't actually win the pawn. So it's better to keep the king here defending the c pawn and keep the pressure on the b pawn and try and round it up at a more appropriate time. So now he plays the much better move, bishop to c7, hitting the knight here, and just preparing the bishop to maneuver and go after the b pawn as well. So a dual purpose move. Rook to d1 was played, keeping the rook in front of the pawn, but maybe with some ideas of skewering the king if it tries to grab the b pawn. And now bishop to d6. So I thought this was another interesting moment. He's not grabbing the knight over here, and it's important to do the calculation. If you take the knight, of course white will take back, and if you grab the pawn, white will grab this pawn, and this is not at all clear. The pawns are even. This pawn is defended for the moment, and black's advantage has just disappeared. Now what else can black play after this point? He could also try king takes the pawn here, trying to stay a pawn up. But now e6, this pawn moves forward, and the threats of queening and getting the rook behind it actually leads to a draw. This rook has to drop back. Pawn goes forward, rook to e8, and now rook takes with check. And once again, the pawns are even. Both sides have passed pawns in this case, and the game is a dead draw actually. So none of those are winning lines. So even though the bishop seems to be threatening to take the knight, it's not actually. So bishop to d6 is good, going after the b pawn, as I mentioned before. And now white here, we're on move 33, so we're approaching the 40 move time control. So white, maybe a little bit short of time, makes a fatal mistake. He plays the move king to e2. So let's see, what is good here? G3 is a move that could be played, just kind of keeping things the way they are, still with an advantage to black, but black will have to play on to prove this advantage. King takes b4 is possible here, but that still gives up the c pawn. Problem with taking with the bishop is it's subject to a pin from rook b1. So yeah, it's not so easy. This is the toughest defense, although still with advantage to black. But king to e2, which was played in the game, is actual mistake, because now it's possible to take the knight. And the difference is bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and this is with check. The king gets to d3, so maybe Taimanov had seen this far, but the king can now take on b4. There's no threat to the c pawn, and it's not good. So maybe he was thinking that he could take here, but that's the problem, is that he can't take right away. He eventually gets that pawn, so maybe it's not so fatal, but he leaves black with this outside c pawn, and this turns out to be the winning advantage. So going back to this position here where he played king e2, yeah, it's possible he just didn't have time to calculate all that out, and he missed something in that sequence. So after this check, coming forward, king takes. Now the problem with grabbing the pawn is that the rook here, check, wins the rook. So that pawn lives for another day. But this pawn here is still somewhat backwards. Rook c1 was played, going after the pawn. Now the king drops back to defend the pawn, and now it's safe to take it. So we get to this position, and maybe Taimanov had even seen this far ahead and said, well, it's just one extra pawn, maybe I can hold this. But this is a very dangerous extra pawn. And notice this maneuver here, rook to d5, cutting the king off. The king can't go forward, can't go anywhere on this file because of the check. Even if the king goes to, say, the square c3, king c3, we have rook c5, check. King goes back to defend the rook, but after the exchange is a winning king and pawn ending. So he needs to keep the rook on, so he has to go back to this side of the board, king to e3, and now he's cut off from the defense. I don't know why that's not working. Yeah, he's cut off by the rook from the defense of the c-pawn, defense against the c-pawn. And not only that, there's this really interesting formation here, with the rook defending the f-pawn, and the f-pawn controlling this square, and the rook controlling all of these squares. This means this king can't really break through. The king can come here, but he can't come up and harass the he can't come up and harass the rook. So anyway, black starts pushing the c-pawn, and at this point it's a fairly straightforward win. So black checks, the king goes to the a file, and rook to b7, getting behind the pawn. h5, getting all the pawns on the 5th rank. Also, the pawn was under attack. He didn't want to just give it up. King to f4. Like I said, the king is trying to get in, but once again, he's cut off by the combination of this rook and pawn. Can't really get to it. And black just pushes on with c4. King to g5. Let's see, what else could he try here? If he were to, say, go after this pawn, yeah, the c-pawn just keeps going. It's just too dangerous. So probably the other idea would be to come here, but then the king can come over and defend the pawn. After a check, the king goes in front of the pawn, and you get this classic maneuver. I covered this in my Chess Basics series, but it's possible to maneuver the king all the way down to the first rank, get the pawn right in front of it, and then walk the king out and queen the pawn. So, and as long as white's king is cut off, there's just no hope in this case. So that's not going to work. Anyway, hoping for some counterplay after c4, Taimanov tried. King g5. Gligoric just marches a pawn forward, c3. King takes h5, he grabs it. Now rook d2, hitting these pawns. The g-pawn comes forward. Rook takes h2, check. King to g5, going after this last pawn. And now just rook to f2, defending that pawn. And there's no stopping the c-pawn from coming through. So at this point, Taimanov resigned, and Gligoric won the game. So pretty interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. For the tournament itself, all the leading candidates drew their games. So the standings are still the same. After 17 rounds, we have Smyslov at 10.5 points. Bronstein and Reshevsky tied for second place, second and third, with 9.5 points. And in fourth place, we have Najdorf with 9 points. So that's the leaderboard after 17 rounds. Stay tuned for round 18 coverage. See you then. Bye.